Back to the Future was rejected more than 40 times for the most 80s reason possible. Back to the Future turns 40 years old this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind Back to the Future starts in the early 70s at USC Film School, where Missouri boy Bob Gale first met Chicago native Robert Zemeckis. Gale, a writer, and Zemeckis, a director, bonded over their shared interest in mainstream movies. While in school, Zemeckis won a Student Academy Award for his short A Field of Honor, which he'd used to force his way into Steven Spielberg's office. Spielberg was impressed and became his mentor. The Jaws director then produced Gale and Zemeckis' first two movies, the Beatles fandom comedy I Wanna Hold Your Hand in 1978, and the dark satire Used Cars in 1980. Both movies flopped at the box office, so Gale and Zemeckis really wanted their next film to be a hit. After Used Cars came out in 1980, writer Bob Gale went home to visit his parents in University City, Missouri, and he came across his father's high school yearbook. He wondered if he and his dad would have been friends in high school, and he thought the only way to actually find out would be if he had a time machine, which sparked the idea for Back to the Future. So Gale and Zemeckis started writing the script in late 1980. They had seen a lot of time travel stories where you couldn't change the past, so to mix it up, in their story, you could change the past and it would have major repercussions on the future. The original script is a little bit different from the movie we know today. For example, in an early draft, the time machine was a stationary contraption that had to be towed around on the back of a truck. Marty's actions in 1955 had bigger impacts on the future, making 1985 much more futuristic, and at the climax, Marty had to use a nuclear explosion to power the time machine. That last bit actually stayed in the script through production, but I'll get to that. They finished their first draft in April 1981, and the first person they pitched it to was Columbia Pictures president Frank Price. Price was a fan of their movie Used Cars, and he liked the Back to the Future script, so he optioned it and encouraged them to write a second draft. But when it came in, he declined to greenlight the movie because he didn't think it would have mass appeal. Columbia then let Gale and Zemeckis pitch it to other studios, but nobody wanted it. They got about 40 rejections for two reasons mostly. One, it wasn't raunchy enough. You see, this was the early 80s, and racy comedies like Animal House, Porky's, and Fast Times were popular at the time, so Back to the Future was seen as too tame by comparison. And the other major reason was recent time travel movies The Final Countdown and Time Bandits had underperformed at the box office. So Gale and Zemeckis were forced to put Back to the Future down for the moment, and Zemeckis went off and made Romancing the Stone as a director for hire. That movie was a hit, which boosted Zemeckis' career, but he didn't want to go groveling back to the studios that rejected him, so he set up Back to the Future at Steven Spielberg's new studio, Amblin Entertainment, which had a distribution deal with Universal. The only problem, Columbia Pictures still owned the rights to the script, so the studios made a trade. Universal gave Columbia the rights to satirize Double Indemnity, and it got Back to the Future in return. Universal exec Sidney Sheinberg then oversaw the project, and he proposed maybe the dumbest title change in Hollywood history. He suggested that they call the movie Spaceman from Pluto. Steven Spielberg wrote off his suggestion as a joke, and thankfully it didn't stick. Though Sheinberg did make one helpful change. Doc Brown originally had a pet chimp in the original script. Sheinberg said it would be easier if it was just a dog. Gale and Zemeckis finished the third draft of the script by July 1984, and now it was time to cast the movie. Michael J. Fox was their first pick based on his work on the sitcom Family Ties, so Spielberg asked Family Ties producer Gary David Goldberg to give Michael J. Fox the script. But Family Ties actor Meredith Baxter was going out on maternity leave, so Goldberg didn't want Fox to take time off from the show also, so he never passed the script along to Michael J. Fox. Zemeckis then considered John Cusack, C. Thomas Howell, Johnny Depp, Ralph Macchio, Charlie Sheen, John Cryer, Ben Stiller, Peter DeLuise, Billy Zane, Robert Downey Jr., and Matthew Modine, among others. Zemeckis and Spielberg liked C. Thomas Howell the most, but Sheinberg preferred Eric Stoltz. And they had to start shooting soon, so Zemeckis agreed Eric Stoltz would be Marty McFly. Though Sheinberg did say if it didn't work out, they could reshoot the film. For Doc Brown, they considered Jeff Goldblum, John Lithgow, Dudley Moore, Ron Silver, Robin Williams, John Cleese, Mandy Patinkin, Gene Hackman, James Woods, and Mark Mothersbaugh. Producer Neil Canton suggested John Lithgow because he worked with him and Christopher Lloyd on Buckaroo Banzai. Lithgow wasn't available, so they offered it to Chris Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd was actually reluctant to take the part at first, but was then convinced by a close friend. He was 46 years old when he appeared in the film. His hair was inspired by Albert Einstein and conductor Leopold Stokowski. They cast Leah Thompson after spotting her in The Wildlife alongside Eric Stoltz. Peter DeLuise and Billy Zane were also considered for Biff Tannen, along with Tim Robbins and J.J. Cohen. Tom Wilson ended up getting the part, his first major film role, but they kept Zane and Cohen as his goons. The last name Tannen came from Ned Tannen, a studio exec who had been rude to Gale and Zemeckis. Melora Hardin was cast as Jennifer at first, opposite Eric Stoltz, but when Michael J. Fox stepped in, Hardin was a lot taller than him, so she was replaced with Claudia Wells. Huey Lewis has a cameo as a Battle of the Bands judge, but only agreed to do it if he could be in disguise. Writer Bob Gale is the Hand in the radiation suit, and Mark Campbell of Jack Mack and the Heart Attack did Marty's singing, though he isn't credited because they wanted people to believe that it was Michael J. Fox singing. Like I said previously, the time machine at first was a stationary device. But during development, Zemeckis suggested it be a DeLorean instead. The DeLorean was a real car first introduced by a small-time automaker in 1981. Zemeckis loved its mobility, unique design, and its UFO-like gull-wing doors. Though the Ford Motor Company tried to get them to switch it to a Mustang and offered them $75,000. Bob Gale responded, "Doc Brown doesn't drive a fucking Mustang." Artists Ron Cobb and Andrew Probert designed the DeLorean time machine for the film, and Blade Runner vet Michael Fink brought it to life practically. They bought 3 DeLoreans for the movie, one for stunts, one for special effects, and one for close-ups. The cars weren't very reliable and often broke down. 88 miles per hour was chosen as the time travel speed because it looked cool and was easy to remember. Special effects artist Ken Chase aged the actors practically. He found this process difficult and ended up using a mix of prosthetics, makeup, and lighting. But it wasn't perfect, and they had to avoid close-up shots of the transformed actors. With pre-production done, Universal gave the project a $14 million budget, which is about $43 million today, and Back to the Future started filming with Eric Stoltz as Marty on November 26, 1984. They were given a very tight timeline. Universal wanted to get the movie out by May 1985. They shot at the Universal Studios lot and on location in Southern California. Real locations included Whittier High School, Griffith Park, and residential homes in Arleta and Pasadena. Puente Hills Mall stood in for the Twin Pines Mall, while the Twin Pines Ranch was shot at Disney's Golden Oak Ranch. The school dance was filmed in the Hollywood United Methodist Church. So what happened with Eric Stoltz? 2 things. 1, his performance was very serious and intense, which wasn't the screwball energy that Zemeckis wanted, and 2, he had tension with some of the other actors on set. Within the first month, Zemeckis could see that Stoltz wasn't working out, but Spielberg said he had to have another actor lined up if he wanted to fire Eric Stoltz and start over. So they reached out to Family Ties producer Gary David Goldberg again regarding Michael J. Fox. Meredith Baxter was now back from maternity leave, so Goldberg agreed to give Michael J. Fox some flexibility. But Fox would not be allowed to miss any workdays on Family Ties. Michael J. Fox then agreed to join Back to the Future without reading the script, and he was reportedly given a salary of $250,000. On January 10th, 1985, Zemeckis told Stoltz that he was fired. The director later called it the hardest meeting I've ever had in my life, and it was all my fault. I broke Stoltz's heart. At the end of the ordeal, they were 34 days behind schedule and racked up an additional $4 million in production costs. Eric Stoltz, for what it's worth, was paid his full salary for the movie. Because of all the delays, Universal moved the release date back to August 1985. Michael J. Fox then reported to the Back to the Future set on January 15th, 1985, and for the next 4 months, he shot the movie and his sitcom at the same time. Fox was so tired that the crew member in charge of driving him home from set often had to carry him into bed. But once Family Ties wrapped for the summer, his energy improved. And the mood on set for everyone was a lot better with Michael J. Fox as Marty. He had to learn how to mimic guitar playing, and he spent weeks practicing his rock moves. Chuck Berry withheld the rights to Johnny Be Good until the day before they filmed that scene. And ultimately, the film paid Berry $50,000 for the rights to the song. Robert Zemeckis almost cut that scene from the movie because it didn't advance the story, but test audiences ended up really liking it, so it stayed. Regarding the nuclear explosion ending, in the script, to get home, Marty was supposed to drive into a nuclear explosion. But this was deemed too complicated and expensive. It would have added $1 million to the budget. So Zemeckis and Gale reworked it to focus on lightning striking the clock tower instead. At the time, it was described as the largest bolt of lightning in cinematic history. Filming wrapped after 107 workdays total on April 26, 1985. Editing was done while the movie was still shooting, and they had a rough cut just 3 weeks after production wrapped. Test screenings played like gangbusters, so Scheinberg decided to move the release date up to July 3rd, 1985. But that meant that ILM had to work extra hard to get the visual effects done in time, and the quality of the effects suffered. The fading photo was especially tricky. They made the DeLorean fly with a mix of live-action footage, animation, and a 1/5 scale model. Alan Silvestri composed the score. He set out to create a heroic theme that would be instantly recognizable and mission accomplished. The filmmaker's only choice for a theme song was Huey Lewis and the News, but Lewis turned them down at first, saying he didn't know how to write a movie song, and that he didn't want to write a song called Back to the Future. They told him he could write whatever he wanted, which ended up being Power of Love. And then later he agreed to write Back in Time as well. The filmmakers also wanted Van Halen music in the movie, but the band declined. Eddie Van Halen still wanted to participate though, so he performed the guitar riff that Marty uses to wake up George. The movie wasn't locked until June 23rd, 1985, under 2 weeks before its release. And Universal took out a full-page ad in Variety thanking the post-production crew for finishing the movie on time. The final budget was $19 million. Legendary poster artist Drew Struzan painted the poster. Struzan is still with us, but due to his dementia, he can no longer paint. Back to the Future opened on 1,420 screens in the US on July 3rd, 1985. It did $11 million opening weekend, debuting at number 1, and then it stayed at number 1 for nearly 3 months. It would go on to gross a total of $223 million worldwide in its initial release, making it the highest grossing movie of 1985. After its various re-releases, the total sits today at $385 million. The movie's soundtrack peaked at number 12 on the Billboard 200 album album chart, and The Power of Love hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Critic reactions at the time were strong, and today 93% of the 111 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. Though some reviewers thought the use of Libyan terrorists, which was an actual concern at the time, was in bad taste. Back to the Future was nominated for 4 Oscars total: Best Original Screenplay, Best Song for Power of Love, Best Sound, and Best Sound Effects Editing, but it only took home that last one. Back to the Future hit home video May 22nd, 1986, during the dawn of VHS tapes, and it was priced at $79.95, and it sold a record 450,000 units that year. The theatrical version of the movie did not have to be continued at the end. That was added for the video release after a sequel was put into development. Back to the Future 2 and 3 were shot back-to-back in 1989, and then released in 89 and 90, making a combined $578 million. Back to the Future would of course grow into a cultural phenomenon. It immediately made Michael J. Fox a major movie star. It repopularized skateboarding as a mainstream pastime. It made the DeLorean, a failed car, a popular collector's item. And despite being made fun of in the movie, President Reagan quoted it in his 1986 State of the Union address. It of course inspired Rick and Morty, Ready Player One, the band McFly. In 2007, the Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry, and it's appeared on numerous best movie lists by the New York Times, Empire, AFI, Total Film, the WGA, and the Hollywood Reporter. It spawned several video game adaptations from 1985 to the 2010s. It got a motion simulator ride at Universal Studios Hollywood and Florida, running from 1991 to 2007. There was an animated series on CBS that ran for 2 seasons in 91 as well. And in 2015, to mark the 30th anniversary, Christopher Lloyd reprised Doc Brown in the canonical short film Doc Brown Saves the World. Then in the 2020s, Back to the Future became a stage musical running in London and on Broadway. So will there ever be another Back to the Future sequel or a reboot? Back to the Future is one of the only 80s franchises that hasn't been revived. But Gale and Zemeckis have both said a sequel will never happen, largely because Michael J. Fox can't return due to his Parkinson's. Now that said, Zemeckis has expressed interest in adapting the musical into a movie, but he claims Universal doesn't want to do it. If you've made it to the end of this video, drop a great Scott in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Let's say a new Back to the Future movie does happen, I'll let you know about it first on my Pop Culture Brain Substack.